Pack your bags and leave, my daughter screamed, her face flushed with rage as she stood in the doorway of my own kitchen. I smiled and called my lawyer instead. The irony wasn't lost on me. 22 years ago, I had held this same furious girl against my chest, whispering promises about the beautiful life we'd build together. Now Sophia stood before me like a stranger, her designer heels clicking against the marble floors I'd paid for, demanding I vacate the house that bore my name on every deed and mortgage document. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Did you hear me, Dad? She crossed her arms, the Cartier bracelet, my last Christmas gift to her, catching the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. I said, pack your bags. This family is done with your lies. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate calm, the same measured movements that had served me well through decades of high-stakes business negotiations. My phone was already in my hand. Marcus Chen's number highlighted on the screen. What lies would those be, sweetheart? I asked, genuinely curious about what narrative had been crafted in my absence. Sophia's laugh was sharp and bitter, nothing like the musical giggle that used to fill our Sunday mornings when she was small. Don't you dare call me that. Not after what you've done to this family. Not after what you've done to Mom. Marcus? It's Thomas, I said into the phone, my eyes never leaving my daughter's face. I need you at the house. Now. Bring the emergency files we discussed. Hang up that phone. Sophia demanded, her voice rising to a pitch that would have sent our neighbors running if we'd had any close enough to hear. The estate sat on 47 acres of precisely landscaped perfection, a fortress of wealth and privacy that had taken me 15 years to build. 20 minutes, Marcus confirmed through the speaker. The Riverside files? All of them, I replied, ending the call. Sophia stared at me with something approaching hatred, her emerald eyes, so much like her mother's, blazing with righteous fury. When had she learned to look at me like that? When had my little girl, the one who used to demand bedtime stories about brave princesses and clever dragons, become this cold stranger? You're pathetic, she spat. Calling your lawyer like some common criminal. Mom was right about you. The mention of Eleanor sent a familiar ache through my chest, but I pushed it aside. Grief was a luxury I couldn't afford right now, not with my daughter apparently ready to wage war against me in my own home. Where is your mother, Sophia? I asked quietly. Like you don't know. She turned away, stalking toward the kitchen island where her designer purse sat open, revealing the telltale orange of prescription bottles. You're the one who put her there. My blood went cold. Put her where? But I was talking to empty air. Sophia had grabbed her purse and was already striding toward the front door, her heels echoing through the foyer like gunshots. The massive front door, imported mahogany that had cost more than most people's cars, slammed shut with enough force to rattle the crystal chandelier hanging 3 stories above. I stood alone in the kitchen of my dream house, surrounded by the silence that had become my constant companion over the past 6 months. Eleanor's coffee cup still sat in the sink, unwashed since the morning she'd left for what I thought was her routine doctor's appointment. That was 3 days ago. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My hands shook as I scrolled through my phone, looking for Eleanor's number. When had I last called my wife? When had we last had a real conversation that wasn't about schedules or household logistics or Sophia's latest crisis? The call went straight to voicemail. Eleanor's voice, warm and familiar, asked me to leave a message after the tone. I opened my mouth to speak, then hung up. What could I possibly say? The house felt enormous around me, every room filled with memories that seemed to mock me now. The grand piano in the living room where Eleanor used to play Chopin on Sunday afternoons. The library where Sophia had done her homework while I worked late into the night, building the empire that was supposed to secure their futures. The master bedroom where Eleanor and I had planned our dreams and shared our fears until somewhere along the way, we'd stopped sharing anything at all. I walked to my study, the one room in the house that was purely mine. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with first editions and business biographies. My desk, a massive piece carved from a single piece of walnut, sat positioned to overlook the gardens where Eleanor spent her mornings tending to her roses. The Riverside files Marcus had been preparing them for months, ever since I'd first noticed the irregularities. Ever since I'd begun to suspect that my carefully constructed life was built on foundations of sand. I pulled out the bottom drawer of my desk, the one that required a biometric scanner to open. Inside, nestled among legal documents and insurance policies, was a thick manila envelope marked, "Personal, Eyes Only." I'd hoped never to open it, the photographs spilled across my desk like accusations. Eleanor with her arm around a man I didn't recognize. Eleanor laughing at an outdoor cafe in a town I'd never visited. Eleanor kissing someone who wasn't her husband of 25 years in the parking lot of a hotel I couldn't name. The private investigator's report was clinical in its thoroughness. 6 months of surveillance. Bank records showing transfers to accounts I'd never authorized. Hotel receipts and restaurant bills charged to credit cards I didn't know existed. Phone records revealing hundreds of calls to a number registered to Dr. James Morrison, a divorced psychiatrist with offices in downtown Portland, but it was the final document that made my hands shake. A residential lease agreement for a townhouse in Riverside, signed by Eleanor Blackwood, not Eleanor Whitman. Not my wife of 25 years, but Eleanor Blackwood, the name she'd used before our marriage. The lease was co-signed by Dr. James Morrison. My wife had been living a double life for 6 months, and I'd been too buried in my work to notice. The doorbell rang, its Westminster chimes echoing through the house. Marcus Chen stood on my doorstep, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. In his hands was a leather briefcase that I knew contained the ammunition for the war I hadn't realized was already being fought. "Thomas," he said simply, his dark eyes filled with the kind of sympathy reserved for terminal diagnoses. "We need to talk." I led him to my study, closing the door behind us out of habit even though we were alone in the house. Marcus had been my attorney for 15 years, handling everything from corporate acquisitions to estate planning. He'd been Eleanor's lawyer too, helping her set up the charitable foundation that had become her passion project. He opened his briefcase with the careful movements of a surgeon, laying documents across my desk in precise rows. "The foundation," he began without preamble, "has been systematically drained over the past 8 months. Nearly $2 million transferred to various accounts, all authorized by Eleanor's signature." I stared at the bank statements, seeing my life's work reduced to numbers on a page. The Whitman Foundation had been Eleanor's dream, my gift to her when Sophia graduated high school. We'd started it with $5 million, money I'd intended to help underprivileged children get access to arts education. "The house," Marcus continued, placing another set of documents before me, "is being contested. Eleanor filed a claim yesterday asserting that she's entitled to half the value as community property, despite the prenuptial agreement." "The prenup is ironclad," I said, though my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "It would be, under normal circumstances." Marcus's expression was grave. "But Eleanor is claiming that the prenup was signed under duress, that you threatened to call off the wedding if she didn't sign. She's also alleging financial abuse, claiming you controlled all the marital assets and gave her an allowance instead of access to joint accounts." I laughed, a sound that held no humor. "I gave her unlimited access to everything. She has her own credit cards, her own investment accounts. Hell, I put her name on half my business holdings as a gift for our 20th anniversary. Which is exactly what makes this so devastating," Marcus said quietly. "She's using your generosity as evidence of manipulation. The narrative is that you showered her with gifts and access to make her feel guilty about questioning your control." The room spun slightly. I gripped the edge of my desk, feeling 25 years of marriage crumble beneath the weight of legal strategy and calculated betrayal. "And Sophia?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Marcus hesitated, then placed a final document on the desk. "Sophia is listed as the primary beneficiary on all of Eleanor's accounts. The townhouse lease shows her as an emergency contact. She's been visiting the Riverside address regularly for the past 3 months. My daughter had known. My little girl, the one I'd taught to ride a bike and drive a car and stand up for herself in a world that wouldn't always be kind, she'd known about her mother's affair and said nothing. Worse, she'd been complicit in dismantling my life piece by piece." "How long do I have?" I asked. "The divorce papers will be served tomorrow morning," Marcus replied. "Eleanor's attorney is David Rosenberg." I knew the name. Rosenberg was a shark, famous for representing wealthy wives in high-profile divorces. He was also expensive, far more expensive than Eleanor could afford on her foundation salary. She's been planning this for months, I said. The pieces finally clicking into place. The foundation money, the new accounts, the townhouse. She's been building her escape fund with my own money. Marcus nodded grimly. It appears so. The question now is how we respond. I looked around my study, at the books that represented years of learning and growth, at the photographs of happier times that now seemed like evidence of my own stupidity. Through the window, I could see Eleanor's rose garden, the one I'd helped her plant during our first year in this house. She'd been so excited about the idea of growing something beautiful together. Thomas? Marcus prompted. We need to discuss strategy. I turned back to him, feeling something cold and determined settling in my chest. For 25 years, I'd built my fortune by seeing opportunities that others missed, by planning 3 moves ahead while my competitors were still figuring out the rules of the game. Pack your bags and leave, I repeated Sophia's words, tasting the irony. That's what she said to me. In my own house, with my own money, wearing jewelry I bought her. The first thing we need to do is freeze the foundation accounts, Marcus said, pulling out his phone. I can get an emergency injunction. No, I interrupted, surprising him. Let them think they're winning. Let them believe I'm the foolish husband who never saw it coming. Marcus frowned. Thomas, they're bleeding. You dry. Every day we wait, they get more confident. More careless. I stood up, walking to the window to look out at the garden where Eleanor had spent so many happy hours. They think I'm just another wealthy husband who got outmaneuvered by a smarter wife. They have no idea who they're really dealing with. Behind me, I heard Marcus gathering up the documents. What are you thinking? I turned back to him, feeling the familiar thrill that came with seeing a complex problem from a new angle. I'm thinking that my wife and daughter have severely underestimated their opponent. They're playing checkers, Marcus. But I built my fortune playing chess. The smile that crossed my face felt foreign after months of confusion and hurt. But underneath the pain, something else was stirring. Something that had made me successful in business was about to make me dangerous in personal war. Schedule a meeting with Dr. Morrison, I said. I think it's time I met the man who's been helping to destroy my marriage. Marcus raised an eyebrow. As your attorney, I have to advise against direct confrontation. Oh, I'm not going to confront him, I replied, already planning my next 3 moves. I'm going to hire him. For the first time since Sophia's ultimatum, I felt like myself. Again. My wife and daughter thought they'd backed me into a corner, that they'd left me with no choice but to accept defeat. They were about to learn that Thomas Whitman had never lost a game he truly wanted to win, and this was one game I was going to enjoy playing. Dr. James Morrison's office occupied the entire 20th floor of the Meridian Tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Portland's skyline. I sat in the burgundy leather chair across from his mahogany desk, playing the role of a man on the edge of a nervous breakdown with an actor's precision. Mr. Whitman, Dr. Morrison said, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a man who specialized in wealthy clients' psychological emergencies. I appreciate you choosing my practice during what must be an incredibly difficult time. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 45, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that suggested regular sessions with personal trainers and expensive dermatologists. His wedding ring had a distinctive scratch across the platinum band, the same scratch I'd noticed in the private investigator's photographs of him embracing my wife. Please, call me Thomas, I said, injecting just the right amount of desperation into my voice. Dr. Morrison, I need to ask you something directly. Do you believe a marriage can survive infidelity? Something flickered across his face, guilt, perhaps, or simple professional discomfort. That's a complex question, Thomas. Every situation is unique. What's brought you to consider this possibility? I leaned forward, clasping my hands together in what I hoped looked like barely contained anguish. My wife has been distant for months. Secretive. I found credit card statements for places she's never mentioned visiting. Hotel charges. Restaurant bills for 2 when she claimed to be shopping alone. Dr. Morrison nodded sympathetically, making notes on his legal pad. These discoveries must be causing you tremendous anxiety. Have you confronted her about your concerns? I'm afraid to, I replied, allowing my voice to crack slightly. 25 years of marriage, Dr. Morrison. Our daughter just turned 22. If I'm wrong, if I'm just being paranoid, I could destroy everything over nothing. But if I'm right, if you're right, then your family is already changed, whether you acknowledge it or not, he said gently. Thomas, I want you to understand that whatever you discover, it's not a reflection of your worth as a person or a husband. The irony of receiving marriage counseling from my wife's lover was almost overwhelming. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. How do I find out for certain? I asked. I can't hire a private investigator, that feels like such a violation of trust. But I can't continue living with this uncertainty either. Dr. Morrison set down his pen and studied me carefully. Have you considered direct communication? Sometimes. Our fears make us see threats where none exist. Perhaps an honest conversation with your wife would, Eleanor, I interrupted, watching his face carefully. My wife's name is Eleanor. The slight pause before his response told me everything I needed to know. Of course. Eleanor. Have you considered talking to Eleanor about your concerns? I spent the next 45 minutes spinning an elaborate tale of marital confusion and midlife crisis, carefully laying the groundwork for what would become a series of sessions. Dr. Morrison was professional, sympathetic, and completely unaware that he was providing therapy to the husband of his secret lover. As our session concluded, I scheduled a follow-up appointment for the following week. Dr. Morrison, I said as I stood to leave, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem like a man who understands the complexities of modern relationships. Have you ever found yourself in complicated situations? His smile was carefully neutral. We all face complications, Thomas. The key is handling them with integrity and consideration for everyone involved. Wise words, I replied, shaking his hand. I'll see you next Thursday. Outside his office, I called Marcus from my car. Phase 1 complete, I said as he answered. Our good doctor has no idea who I am. Thomas, I still think this is unnecessarily risky. If he discovers your identity, he won't. I paid cash, used my middle name on the intake forms, and gave a false address. As far as Dr. Morrison knows, Thomas Jonathan is a wealthy but unremarkable businessman having marital problems. And if Eleanor mentions her husband's name during their encounters, I smiled grimly. Then Dr. Morrison will have to choose between maintaining his professional ethics and protecting his personal interests. Either way, we win. My next stop was the riverside townhouse where Eleanor had been living her alternate life. I parked across the street, watching the building through dark-tinted windows. It was a modest place by my standards, perhaps 3,000 square feet, with a small garden and attached garage. The kind of place a woman might choose if she were trying to live quietly while planning her escape. At 3:47 p.m., exactly as the private investigators' reports had indicated, Eleanor's silver BMW pulled into the driveway. I watched my wife of 25 years emerge from the car, moving with a lightness I hadn't seen in years. She looked younger somehow, wearing a flowing sundress I'd never seen before and carrying flowers from what appeared to be a farmer's market. She was happy. Genuinely, radiantly happy in a way that sent a knife through my chest. 20 minutes later, Dr. Morrison's black Audi pulled up behind her BMW. I watched through my telephoto lens as he bounded up the front steps with the enthusiasm of a man visiting his lover, not a patient. Eleanor opened the door before he could knock, and they embraced with the familiarity of a long-established relationship. I took photographs. Dozens of them. Not for legal purposes, Marcus already had more evidence than any court would need, but for my own understanding. I needed to see them together, to witness the reality of their betrayal with my own eyes. Through the large front window, I could see them moving around what appeared to be a living room. Eleanor was arranging her flowers in a vase while Dr. Morrison opened a bottle of wine. They looked like a couple settling into domestic bliss, comfortable and secure in their secret world. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Dad, we need to talk. Meet me at Cafe Luna at 7 p.m. Come alone. I stared at the message, wondering what new performance my daughter had planned. Cafe Luna was Eleanor's favorite restaurant, the place where we'd celebrated anniversaries and birthdays and promotions. Taking me there was either monumentally insensitive or carefully calculated psychological warfare. I typed back, I'll be there. As I drove home to prepare for whatever confrontation Sophia had in mind, I reflected on the day's discoveries. Eleanor wasn't just having an affair, she was living an entirely separate life. The townhouse, the false name, the systematic draining of the foundation accounts, the coordination with Dr. Morrison and Sophia. This wasn't a midlife crisis or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to extract maximum value from our marriage before discarding me entirely, but they had made one crucial error in their planning. They assumed I was the same man Eleanor had married 25 years ago, trusting, focused on business, naive about personal relationships. They had no idea that success in my industry had required me to become an expert in reading people, anticipating betrayal, and planning for every contingency. I arrived at Café Luna 10 minutes early, requesting a table in the back corner where I could observe the entire restaurant. Sophia entered precisely at 7, her designer outfit and perfect makeup a stark contrast to the vulnerable young woman who had begged me to help her through college just 2 years ago. She slid into the chair across from me without preamble. "You look terrible, Dad." "I'm sure I do. It's been an interesting few days." Our server approached, a young man who recognized me from previous visits with Eleanor. "Mr. Whitman. We haven't seen you and Mrs. Whitman in months. How is she?" "She's wonderful," I replied smoothly. "Busier than ever with her foundation work. Just the two of us tonight." Sophia ordered a glass of wine with the casual confidence of someone who had never been denied anything. I stuck with coffee, wanting to keep my mind sharp for whatever was coming. "You called your lawyer," she said once we were alone. "Yes." "Good. I was hoping you'd be smart enough to recognize reality." She leaned back in her chair, studying me with Eleanor's emerald eyes. "Dad, this doesn't have to be ugly. Mom doesn't want to hurt you." I nearly laughed at the absurdity of that statement. How considerate of her. "I'm serious." "She's prepared to be reasonable about the division of assets if you don't fight the divorce." "And what does reasonable mean in this context?" Sophia reached into her purse and withdrew a folded document. "She keeps the house, half of your liquid assets, and full control of the foundation. You keep your business interests and the vacation properties. Clean, simple, fair." I unfolded the paper, scanning the proposed settlement terms. It was even worse than I'd anticipated. Eleanor was claiming not just half of our marital assets, but half of my business holdings, companies I'd built from nothing long before I'd ever met her. "This is interesting," I said calmly. "But I have some questions." "Such as?" "Such as how your mother plans to explain the missing $2 million from the foundation accounts." Sophia's confidence flickered for just a moment. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't. Just like you don't know about the townhouse in Riverside, or the credit cards in your mother's maiden name, or Dr. James Morrison." The color drained from her face. "Dad, no, Sophia. You had your turn yesterday when you told me to pack my bags. Now it's my turn to talk." I kept my voice low and calm, but there was steel underneath. "Your mother has been systematically stealing from a charity designed to help underprivileged children. She's been living a double life for at least 6 months, possibly longer. And you've been helping her do it. It's not stealing if it's her foundation, it's not her foundation. It's a registered 501(c)(3) charity with a board of directors and legal obligations. What she's done isn't just adultery, Sophia. It's embezzlement." My daughter's hands were shaking now. "You can't prove any of that." I reached into my jacket and placed a manila envelope on the table between us. "Bank records. Surveillance photos. Phone records. Credit card statements. Property deeds. I can prove all of it." Sophia stared at the envelope as if it might explode. "What do you want?" "I want my daughter back," I said simply. "The one who used to believe that keeping promises mattered. The one who thought lying was wrong even when it was convenient. The one who loved me enough to call me daddy until she was 16. Tears began to form in her eyes, and for a moment I saw the little girl I'd raised instead of the calculating young woman sitting across from me. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Mom was miserable. You were never home, always working, always putting the business first. She felt like she was married to a ghost. So she decided to marry someone else instead of talking to me about it. She tried to talk to you. For years she tried. But you were always too busy, always had another meeting. Another deal, another crisis that was more important than your own family. Her words hit harder than I'd expected because they contained more truth than I wanted to acknowledge. How many dinners had I missed? How many conversations had I cut short because of work calls? How many times had I promised Eleanor we'd take that vacation, have that talk, make that change, later, when things calmed down, when this project was finished, when the next quarter was over? You're right, I said quietly. I was a terrible husband in many ways. But that doesn't justify what you and your mother have done. So what happens now? Sophia asked, wiping her eyes with her napkin. I looked around the restaurant, remembering happier times when this place had represented celebration rather than confrontation. Eleanor and I had shared our first kiss goodnight outside this very building, 26 years ago. We'd announced our engagement to my parents at table 12. We'd celebrated Sophia's acceptance to Stanford in the private dining room upstairs. Now, I said, standing and placing enough cash on the table to cover our bill, you go back to your mother's townhouse and tell her that I know everything. Tell her that if she wants to negotiate, she can do it through attorneys. And tell her that if she continues to steal from the foundation, I'll have her arrested. Dad, please, I love you, Sophia. I will always love you. But loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. I picked up the envelope, leaving her sitting alone at the table. When you're ready to stop being your mother's accomplice and start being my daughter again, you know where to find me. As I walked toward the exit, I heard her call after me. What if it's too late? What if we've gone too far to come back? I turned back to look at her one last time. Then I guess we'll all have to live with the consequences of the choices we've made. Outside in the parking lot, I called Marcus. Change of plans, I said as he answered. File the countersuit tomorrow morning. Fraud, embezzlement, and theft. I want Eleanor arrested by Friday. Thomas, are you sure? Once we cross this line, they crossed the line months ago, Marcus. I'm just finally deciding to do something about it. As I drove home through the Portland evening, I thought about the look in Sophia's eyes when she'd asked if it was too late. The truth was, I didn't know. Some betrayals cut so deep that they never fully heal. Some trust, once broken, could never be restored, but I was done being the victim in my own life. Eleanor and Sophia had underestimated me, treating me like a wealthy fool who could be manipulated and discarded at their convenience. Tomorrow, they would discover that the man who had built a fortune from nothing was perfectly capable of protecting what was his. The game was just beginning. The arrest warrant was served at 6:23 a.m. on Friday morning. I watched from my car across the street as 2 Portland police detectives knocked on the door of the Riverside townhouse. Through my telephoto lens, I captured Eleanor's face as she answered the door in her silk robe, the confusion, then recognition. Then the devastating moment when she understood that her carefully constructed world was collapsing. Dr. Morrison appeared behind her in the doorway, wearing hastily thrown-on clothes and an expression of absolute panic. The detectives were professional but firm, reading Eleanor her rights while she stood frozen in shock. When they placed the handcuffs on her wrists, she finally broke, her composure cracking like fine china against concrete. My phone rang as they led her to the patrol car. Sophia's name flashed on the screen. You bastard, she sobbed when I answered. How could you do this to her? I didn't do anything to her, Sophia. She did this to herself. She's being charged with felony embezzlement. Do you understand what this means? Her reputation, her foundation work, everything she's built, everything she built with stolen money, I interrupted. Money that was supposed to help children get access to arts education. Money that she funneled into bank accounts to fund her affair. Through the phone, I could hear Dr. Morrison's voice in the background, urgent and agitated. They were at his office, I realized. Sophia had run to him instead of coming to me. Dad, please. We can fix this. We can pay the money back, work out some kind of arrangement. The time for arrangements was before your mother decided to steal $2 million from a children's charity. It wasn't stealing. She founded that charity, she had every right, she had no right, Sophia. And deep down, you know that. I ended the call, watching as the police car disappeared around the corner, carrying my wife away from the life she'd tried to build on the ruins of our marriage. My second phone rang immediately, Marcus calling with updates from his contacts in the district attorney's office. It's done, he said without preamble. Eleanor was processed and released on a $100,000 bond. Her attorney is David Rosenberg, as expected. How did she make bail so quickly? Dr. Morrison posted it. Apparently he liquidated some investment accounts to cover the amount. I felt a grim satisfaction at that news. Eleanor's lover was already paying for his involvement in her schemes, bleeding money to keep her out of jail. What's our next move? Marcus asked. Schedule a meeting with the Foundation's board of directors for Monday morning. I want them to understand exactly what Eleanor has done to their organization. The Whitman Foundation board consisted of 5 prominent Portland citizens, all of whom had donated significant time and money to what they believed was a legitimate charity. Dr. Patricia Vance, the retired superintendent of Portland Public Schools. Judge William Thornton, recently retired from the state Supreme Court. Maria Santos, CEO of Portland Children's Hospital. Robert Kim, a successful tech entrepreneur. And Eleanor's best friend since college, Catherine Walsh. They gathered in the conference room of Marcus's law firm on Monday morning, their faces reflecting varying degrees of confusion and concern. None of them knew why they'd been summoned for an emergency meeting, but all of them had heard about Eleanor's arrest through Portland's surprisingly efficient wealthy social network. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, standing at the head of the conference table, thank you for coming on such short notice. I know Eleanor's situation has raised questions about the Foundation's operations. Catherine Walsh leaned forward, her loyalty to Eleanor evident in every line of her posture. Thomas, I don't know what kind of marital dispute you and Eleanor are having, but dragging the Foundation into it is unconscionable. I agree completely, I replied, nodding to Marcus, who began distributing thick folders to each board member. Which is why you need to see exactly what Eleanor has done to this organization. For the next hour, I walked them through the evidence. Bank statements showing systematic transfers to unauthorized accounts. Forged board resolutions approving expenditures that had never been voted on. Credit card charges for personal expenses disguised as Foundation business. A paper trail that revealed not just theft, but elaborate fraud designed to cover the theft. Judge Thornton was the first to break the silence that followed my presentation. Thomas, are you certain about these allegations? The legal ramifications, I'm certain, Your Honor. The district attorney's office has reviewed all of this evidence. Eleanor has been charged with felony embezzlement, and the FBI is conducting their own investigation into potential federal charges. Dr. Vance removed her reading glasses, looking older than her 72 years. $2 million. $2 million. Meant for disadvantaged children. I've already arranged to personally cover the stolen funds, I said. The Foundation's programs won't suffer because of Eleanor's actions. But we need to discuss the organization's future. Maria Santos had been quietly reviewing the financial records, her expression growing more troubled with each page. These transfers, they go back 8 months. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment, it was systematic. Which brings us to the question of governance, I continued. The Foundation needs new leadership, new oversight, and new policies to ensure this never happens again. Catherine Walsh finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I've known Eleanor for 30 years. I was her maid of honor. I'm godmother to your daughter. I would have sworn on my children's lives that she was incapable of something like this. So would I replied honestly. But the evidence speaks for itself. Robert Kim had been silent throughout the presentation, his tech entrepreneur's mind clearly processing the implications. What are you proposing, Thomas? I'm proposing to step down from the board and donate my seat to someone with no personal connection to this situation. I'm proposing that we hire an independent audit firm to review every transaction from the past 3 years. And I'm proposing that we establish new financial controls that require unanimous board approval for any expenditure over $5,000. And Eleanor? Judge Thornton asked. Eleanor will face the consequences of her choices. That's not our decision, it's the justice system's. The vote to accept my proposals was unanimous. Even Catherine Walsh, tears streaming down her face, raised her hand in support. As the board members filed out, each of them looking as if they'd witnessed the collapse of something sacred, I felt the weight of what I'd destroyed settling on my shoulders, but I also felt something else, vindication. Eleanor hadn't just betrayed me, she'd betrayed every child who would have benefited from the programs her theft had undermined. She'd betrayed every board member who had trusted her with their reputation and resources. She'd betrayed the very principles she claimed to champion. That afternoon, I kept my scheduled appointment with Dr. Morrison, curious to see how Eleanor's arrest had affected my wife's lover. He looked haggard, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept since Friday morning, and his hands shook slightly as he poured himself coffee from the machine in his office. "Thomas," he said, settling into his chair with obvious exhaustion, "I have to ask, how are you processing the news about your wife's legal troubles?" The irony was almost overwhelming. Here was the man who had helped destroy my marriage, asking me to discuss my feelings about the consequences of his actions. "It's been devastating," I replied, playing my role perfectly. 25 years of marriage, and it turns out I never really knew her at all. Dr. Morrison's professional facade was cracking. "Sometimes the people closest to us are capable of things we never imagined." "Do you think she's guilty?" I asked, watching his face carefully. He was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling between his professional obligations and his personal involvement. I think people sometimes make choices that seem rational in the moment but have consequences they never anticipated." "You sound like you're speaking from experience." "We all make mistakes, Thomas. The question is whether we learn from them or let them define us." I leaned forward, injecting concern into my voice. "Dr. Morrison, you seem troubled today. I hope my situation isn't bringing up difficult memories for you." He rubbed his temples, looking more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. "I'm sorry, Thomas. You're right, I'm not at my best today. I've been dealing with some personal complications of my own." "Anything you'd care to share?" Sometimes talking about our own struggles helps us help others. For a moment, I thought he might confess everything: the affair, the complicity in Eleanor's schemes, the terrible position he'd put himself in by posting her bail. But then his professional training reasserted itself. "I appreciate your concern, but our focus should be on your healing process. Tell me, how are you managing the anger you must be feeling toward Eleanor?" The session continued for another 30 minutes, with Dr. Morrison offering marriage counseling to the husband of his secret lover while struggling to maintain his composure. By the time I left his office, I was convinced that he was as trapped as Eleanor in the web of their own making. That evening, Sophia called again. This time, her voice was different, less defiant, more desperate. "Dad, I need to see you. Can you meet me at the house?" "My house?" "Yes. I need to get some things from my room. And we need to talk." I found her sitting on the steps of the front porch, looking smaller and younger than she had since high school. She'd been crying, her carefully applied makeup smeared and ruined. "The house feels so empty," she said as I approached. "I keep expecting Mom to come around the corner, asking if I want tea." I sat down beside her on the steps, maintaining careful distance. "Your mother made her choices, Sophia. Now she has to live with them." "Do you hate her?" The question caught me off guard. Did I hate Eleanor? The woman who had shared my bed for 25 years, who had given me my daughter, who had stood beside me as I built my business from nothing? "I hate what she did," I said finally. "I hate that she chose deception over honesty, theft over communication, betrayal over trust." "But hate her?" "No. I'm disappointed. I'm hurt. I'm angry. But I don't hate her. She's scared, Dad. Really scared. She keeps saying this is all a misunderstanding, that you're manipulating the evidence to hurt her. But I've seen the bank statements. I know what she did." I turned to look at my daughter, seeing the conflict written across her face. "How long have you known about the affair?" 3 months. "About the money?" "I just found out last week." "And you said nothing?" What was I supposed to say? "Hey Dad, by the way, Mom's sleeping with her psychiatrist and stealing from the charity you founded together?" How do you have that conversation? "You start with the truth, Sophia. You always start with the truth." She laughed bitterly. "Easy for you to say. You've never had to choose between your parents. You didn't have to choose between us. You chose to enable her. I chose to protect her." She was finally happy for the first time in years. Do you know what it was like, watching her pretend to be satisfied with a marriage that made her miserable? Was I really such a terrible husband? Sophia was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer. "You weren't terrible. You were absent. Even when you were physically here, your mind was always somewhere else. Mom used to joke that she was married to a very successful ghost. The words stung because they held truth. I had been absent, focused on building wealth and security at the expense of emotional connection. But that didn't justify what Eleanor had done. I want to make things right with you, I said. But I need to know that you understand what your mother did was wrong. I understand. I don't know how to stop loving her because she made terrible choices. You don't have to stop loving her. But you do have to stop enabling her. Sophia nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Dr. Morrison wants to hire you a different therapist. He says there's a conflict of interest with your case. I almost smiled at that. Dr. Morrison was finally beginning to understand the ethical quicksand he'd wandered into. And what do you think about Dr. Morrison? I asked. I think he's a man who fell in love with someone else's wife and convinced himself that made stealing acceptable. She looked at me directly for the first time since I'd arrived. I think Mom found someone who told her what she wanted to hear instead of what she needed to hear. And what did she need to hear? That running away doesn't solve problems. It just creates new ones. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. The garden stretched out before us. Eleanor's roses blooming despite their caretaker's absence. What happens now? Sophia asked finally. Now your mother faces trial. If she's convicted, she'll likely serve time in federal prison. Dr. Morrison will probably lose his license and face his own charges. And you and I will try to rebuild some kind of relationship. Do you think we can? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, for the first time in months. Beneath the designer clothes and carefully applied makeup, I could still see traces of the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms. I think that depends on whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem. I said. The choice is yours, Sophia. It always has been. She nodded slowly, understanding that we had reached a crossroads. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, new tests of character for all of us, but tonight, for the first time since this nightmare began, I sat with my daughter and felt something that might, eventually, grow back into trust. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, unmarked except for my name written in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. No return address, no postmark, someone had delivered it personally to my front door while I slept. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small brass key. Thomas, there are things you don't know. Things that change everything. The key opens. A safety deposit box at First National Bank, Downtown Branch, Box 847. Go alone. Trust no one else with this, not even Marcus. Whatever you think you know about our marriage, about me, about Sophia, you're wrong. The truth is worse than you imagine. I stared at the letter for a long time, turning the small brass key over in my fingers. Eleanor had been in jail for a week, released only for supervised visits with her attorney. How had she managed to get this to me? And why now, when her trial was scheduled to begin in less than a month, against my better judgment, I drove to the bank. The safety deposit box was registered under a name I didn't recognize, Margaret Chen, with Eleanor listed as an authorized user. The signature card showed she'd been accessing the box regularly for over 2 years. The bank employee, a nervous young man who clearly recognized me from the news coverage of Eleanor's arrest, led me to a private viewing room. Inside the box was a thick manila folder and a small digital recorder. My hands shook as I opened the folder, revealing documents that made my blood run cold. The first was a medical report from Oregon Health and Science University, dated 3 years ago. Eleanor's name was on the header, along with test results that changed everything. Confirmed diagnosis of early-onset Alzheimer's disease. Estimated progression, 5 to 7 years to severe cognitive impairment. 3 years. Eleanor had known for 3 years that her mind was slowly disappearing, and she'd never told me. The second document was even more devastating, a power of attorney agreement giving Sophia complete control over Eleanor's medical and financial decisions, signed 18 months ago. Below that, a living will specifying that Eleanor never wanted to be kept alive artificially, never wanted to burden her family with the cost of long-term care, but it was the third document that shattered everything I thought I knew about the past year. A detailed letter in Eleanor's handwriting, dated 8 months ago. If you're reading this, then my plan has worked and I'm either dead or so far gone that I can't hurt anyone else anymore. Thomas, my darling, brilliant, stubborn husband, I'm so sorry for what I'm about to do to you. Dr. Morrison isn't my lover. He's my neurologist, the specialist treating my Alzheimer's. The townhouse isn't a love nest, it's a memory care facility. Where I've been living part-time, learning to cope with my diagnosis while trying to spare you and Sophia the horror of watching me disappear piece by piece, the money I took from the foundation. I didn't steal it for personal pleasure. I used it to fund an experimental treatment trial at Johns Hopkins, trying to buy time. Time to figure out how to tell you. Time to make arrangements for my care that wouldn't destroy your life's work. Time to give Sophia some financial security before I became a burden that would consume everything we've built. I know how this looks. I know you'll think I chose betrayal over honesty. But, Thomas, I chose hope over despair. I chose to fight this disease on my own terms rather than surrender to it. I chose to protect the two people I love most in the world from a truth that would have destroyed them. Sophia knows. She's known since the beginning. She's been helping me, not because she wanted to hurt you, but because she understood what I was trying to do. We thought if we could make you angry enough, if we could make you hate me enough, it would be easier for you when I'm gone. A bitter divorce is easier to survive than watching someone you love disappear one memory at a time. The affair was a lie. The townhouse visits were medical appointments. The secret bank accounts were treatment funds. The cruelty was camouflage, designed to give you a reason to let me go without guilt. I know this was selfish. I know I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning. But I've seen what this disease does to families, Thomas. I've watched strong marriages crumble under the weight of caregiving. I've seen children sacrifice their futures to care for parents who no longer recognize them. I couldn't do that to you. I couldn't do that to Sophia. By the time you read this, I'll be in the final stages. The woman you're angry at, the woman you're divorcing, the woman you think betrayed you, she's already gone. I'm just the shadow she left behind, trying to clean up the mess. I love you, Thomas. I have loved you for 25 years, and whatever's left of me will love you until my last conscious moment. Please don't let hatred be the last emotion you feel for me. Please remember that everything I did out of love. Tell Sophia she doesn't have to pretend anymore. Tell her I'm proud of the woman she's become and the strength she's shown through this nightmare. Tell her that protecting you was the most important thing she's ever done for me. And Thomas, please don't try to save me. I'm already gone. Save yourself instead. All my love, Eleanor. I read the letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated. Then I reached for the digital recorder with trembling hands. Eleanor's voice filled the small bank vault, recorded months ago when she was still lucid enough to plan this revelation. Thomas, if you're hearing this, then you've found my contingency plan. I hope you can forgive me for what I've put you through, but I need you to understand the timeline of my deception. 18 months ago, I started forgetting things. Small things at first, where I put my keys, what I'd planned for dinner, the names of people we'd known for years. I told myself it was stress, menopause, normal aging. But when I got lost driving to the grocery store, a route I'd taken 1,000 times, I knew something was seriously wrong. The diagnosis was devastating, but the prognosis was worse. Early onset Alzheimer's is aggressive, Thomas. Dr. Morrison gave me 3 to 5 years before I'd need full-time care, maybe 7 if I was lucky. I started planning immediately. The experimental treatment at Johns Hopkins was expensive, $2 million for a chance at slowing the progression. Insurance wouldn't cover it because it was still in trials. I couldn't ask you for the money, because I couldn't tell you why I needed it. So I borrowed against the foundation, telling myself it was a temporary loan that I'd repay if the treatment worked. It didn't work. If anything, it accelerated my decline. By month 6, I was having episodes where I didn't recognize Sophia. By month 8, I was getting confused about where I lived, what year it was, whether you and I were still married. That's when Sophia and I developed the plan. We would stage a marriage breakdown that would give you grounds for divorce. We would make you angry enough to walk away without looking back. We would create a story that would let you rebuild your life without the burden of a wife who was slowly disappearing. The townhouse became my safe house, a place where I could go when the confusion got too bad, where Sophia could take care of me without you having to witness my decline. Dr. Morrison helped us set up the medical equipment, the monitoring systems, the 24-hour care that I'd need in the final stages. Everything we did was calculated to hurt you in the short term to protect you in the long term. The cruel words, the demands that you leave, the apparent theft, all of it was designed to make letting go easier when the time came. I know this was wrong, Thomas. I know I should have trusted you with the truth. But I also know you. If I'd told you about the diagnosis, you would have devoted your life to caring for me. You would have sacrificed your business, your health, your future to chase treatments that wouldn't work and hope that wouldn't materialize. I couldn't let you do that to yourself. Sophia wanted to tell you from the beginning. She argued with me for months, begging me to let her explain. But I made her promise to keep my secret, and she honored that promise even when it meant watching you hate her for choices she didn't make. The arrest was unexpected. I didn't anticipate that you'd have me investigated so thoroughly, or that you'd find evidence of the foundation transfers so quickly. When the police came to the townhouse, I was having one of my bad days. I barely understood what was happening or why. Dr. Morrison posted my bail because he felt responsible for not convincing me to tell you the truth sooner. He's been advocating for honesty from the beginning, Thomas. Whatever anger you feel toward him is misplaced. By the time you hear this recording, I'll probably be in the moderate to severe stages of the disease. I may not remember making this recording. I may not remember you. But somewhere in whatever's left of my mind, I'll still love you. Please don't let our story end with anger and recrimination. Please don't let Sophia carry the burden of my secrets any longer. And please try to understand that everything I did was an act of love, even when it looked like betrayal. The recording continued for another 20 minutes, with Eleanor providing detailed explanations of every deception, every calculated cruelty, every moment that had seemed like betrayal but was actually sacrifice. By the time it ended, I was sobbing in the sterile privacy of the bank vault. I sat there for over an hour, processing the revelation that my wife hadn't betrayed me. She'd been trying to save me from a tragedy too devastating to comprehend. The woman I'd been divorcing, the woman I'd had arrested, the woman I'd been systematically destroying through legal warfare, she'd been dying slowly, one memory at a time, while trying to protect me from the horror of watching it happen. My phone rang. Marcus Chen, probably wondering where I was for our scheduled meeting about Eleanor's defense strategy. Marcus, I said, my voice hoarse from crying, we need to talk. Emergency meeting, your office, 1 hour. Thomas, what's wrong? You sound, everything's wrong, Marcus. Everything we've done, everything we've planned, it's all wrong. I drove to Marcus's office in a daze, the safety deposit box key still clutched in my hand. The documents and recording were secure in my briefcase, evidence of a love so profound that it had masqueraded as betrayal to protect the people it cherished most. When I arrived at Marcus's office, I found him waiting with Dr. Morrison and Sophia. They sat around the conference table like co-conspirators, which I now realized they were, not conspirators in Eleanor's destruction, but in her desperate attempt at salvation. You found the safety deposit box, Sophia said quietly, seeing my face. How long have you all known I would? I asked, sinking into a chair across from them. Dr. Morrison spoke first. Eleanor planned this revelation carefully, Thomas. She wanted you to discover the truth only after you'd had time to process your anger, only after you'd been forced to confront what losing her would really mean. She's been orchestrating this entire scenario, Marcus added, his expression grim. The timing of the arrests, the evidence trail, even my involvement, she planned for all of it. I looked at Sophia, seeing her clearly for the first time in months. How long has she been gone? Cognitively? About 6 weeks. She has moments of clarity, but they're getting shorter and less frequent. Most of the time, she doesn't remember the townhouse, the foundation, or why she's facing criminal charges. And physically? Dr. Morrison thinks maybe 6 months, maybe less. The stress of the legal proceedings is accelerating her decline. I opened my briefcase and placed Eleanor's letter on the table. She wants me to drop the charges. She wants you to understand why we did what we did, Sophia corrected. The charges, that's your decision. But Dad, she's dying. Whatever punishment you think she deserves, she's already receiving it in the cruelest way possible. Dr. Morrison leaned forward, his professional demeanor tinged with personal pain. Thomas, I need you to understand something. Eleanor has been my patient for 2 years, but she's also become my friend. Watching her fight this disease, watching her sacrifice everything to protect you and Sophia, she's one of the bravest people I've ever known. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice breaking. Why did you let me destroy her? Because she made us promise not to, Marcus replied. And because she convinced us that you'd never forgive yourself if you knew the truth while it was happening. I thought about the past year, about every cruel word I'd spoken, every legal maneuver I'd orchestrated, every moment I'd felt righteous in my anger. Eleanor had endured it all, knowing she was dying, knowing she was innocent, protecting me from a truth she thought would destroy me. What do I do now? I asked, feeling more lost than I had since childhood. Sophia reached across the table and took my hand. Now you decide whether you want to spend Mom's last months fighting her or loving her. Through the conference room windows, I could see downtown Portland going about its ordinary Tuesday business. People walking to lunch meetings, running errands, living normal lives unaware that in this room, a man was confronting the terrible mathematics of love and loss. Eleanor had bet everything on a gamble that breaking my heart temporarily would hurt less than watching her disappear slowly. She'd sacrificed her reputation, her freedom, and our marriage to spare me the agony of being her caregiver in the final stages of Alzheimer's. The question now was whether I could forgive her for loving me that much, and whether I could forgive myself for not seeing the truth sooner. I stood outside the Riverside Memory Care Facility at dawn, watching the sunrise paint the windows gold. The building looked different now that I understood its true purpose, not a love nest, but a sanctuary where my wife had been learning to die with dignity while I'd been learning to hate her with precision. The facility director, Dr. Sarah Kim, met me in the lobby. She was a small woman in her 50s with kind eyes that had clearly witnessed too much suffering. Mr. Whitman, she said gently, Eleanor is having one of her better mornings. She's been asking for someone named Thomas. Though she's not always clear about who that is. How often does she remember me? Less frequently now. Sometimes you're her husband of 25 years. Sometimes you're her father. Yesterday, she thought you were a nice man who reminded her of someone she used to love. I followed Dr. Kim. Through corridors lined with artwork clearly created by residents, finger paintings and simple crafts that spoke to minds returning to childhood as they prepared to leave the world. The walls were painted in soothing blues and greens, with soft lighting designed to minimize confusion and anxiety. She's in the garden room, Dr. Kim explained as we walked. She loves the sunlight in the mornings. It seems to help with her orientation. The garden room was a glass-enclosed solarium filled with plants and comfortable seating. Eleanor sat in a wheelchair by the windows, wearing a soft yellow dress I'd bought her for her last birthday. Her hair, once professionally styled every week, hung loose around her shoulders. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile in a way that had nothing to do with age. Eleanor? Dr. Kim said softly, approaching the wheelchair. You have a visitor. My wife turned toward us, and for a moment her eyes were clear and focused. She knew me. I could see recognition bloom across her face like sunrise. Thomas, she whispered, her voice carrying wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe I was real. You came. I knelt beside her wheelchair, taking her hands in mine. They were cool and thin, the wedding ring I'd placed there 25 years ago. Now loose on her finger. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here. I was afraid you wouldn't come. I was afraid you'd stay angry forever. Tears began streaming down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Thomas. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. Shoo, I said, brushing the tears away with my thumb. I know why you did it. I understand now. Do you? She searched my face desperately. Do you really understand? I thought if I made you hate me, it would hurt less when I was gone. I thought anger would be easier than grief. I could never hate you, Eleanor. Even when I thought I did, I was really just scared of losing you. She smiled then, the same radiant smile that had stopped my heart at a charity auction 26 years ago. You always were terrible at staying angry. Remember when Sophia broke your grandfather's watch? You tried to ground her, but you ended up building her a treehouse instead. I laughed despite my tears. She was 8 years old and sorry. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to be the stern father. I was supposed to be the soft one. But you never could resist a genuine apology. For the next hour, we talked like we hadn't in years. Eleanor drifted in and out of clarity, sometimes forgetting where we were or why I'd come, but always returning to the central truth that she loved me and was sorry for the pain she'd caused. The money, she said during one lucid moment. Did I explain about the money? The treatment, it was supposed to help. Dr. Morrison said there was a chance. I know about Johns Hopkins. I know about the experimental therapy. It made everything worse, she said sadly. The side effects, the confusion got so much worse. That's when we knew I was running out of time to make arrangements. Eleanor, the charges against you, oh, Thomas, I don't care about that. I won't remember any of it soon anyway. She gripped my hands with surprising strength. What I care about is you. And Sophia. You have to take care of each other when I'm gone. Sophia and we've been at war for months. Because of me. Because of what I asked her to do. Eleanor's eyes filled with guilt. She wanted to tell you from the beginning. I made her choose between protecting you and being honest with you. That wasn't fair to either of you. Dr. Kim had quietly withdrawn, leaving us alone in the garden room. Through the windows, I could see other residents walking in the courtyard, some with family members, others with staff. This was where Eleanor's journey would end, among strangers who would care for her with professional kindness while her family rebuilt their relationships in her shadow. I want to bring you home, I said suddenly. Eleanor shook her head. You can't. I won't let you sacrifice your life to watch me disappear. It's my choice to make. No, it's not. Not anymore. She touched my cheek gently. Thomas, I have maybe 6 months of awareness left, if I'm lucky. After that, I'll be gone even while I'm still breathing. I won't have you waste years of your life caring for someone who won't remember your name. You're my wife. I was your wife. The woman you married, the woman who loved you and built a life with you, she's already gone. I'm just the echo she left behind. I wanted to argue, to insist that love didn't have expiration dates, that marriage vows meant something even when one partner couldn't remember making them. But looking at Eleanor, seeing the determined peace in her eyes, I understood that this was another gift she was trying to give me, the freedom to remember her as she was rather than watch her become someone else entirely. What do you need from me? I asked finally. Forgive Sophia. She's been carrying this burden alone for too long, and she's going to need her father when I'm gone. What else? Drop the charges. Please. I know they were justified, but I don't want to spend my last clear days in courtrooms and legal meetings. Already done. Marcus filed the paperwork this morning. Eleanor smiled with relief. And the foundation? Will be rebuilt, properly this time. The money you used? I've already replaced it. The programs will continue. Good. Those children deserve their chance at art and music and beauty. She paused, looking out at the garden where other residents sat in the sunshine. There's something else I need to tell you. What? Dr. Morrison. James. He's been more than just my doctor, Thomas. He's been my friend through this nightmare. He held my hand during the worst days, helped me plan for my care, listened when I needed to talk about my fears. I need you to know that he never took advantage of my situation. He never, what you thought was happening between us, it was never that. I know. I understand now. He's a good man who got caught up in my deception. When this is all over, when I'm gone, don't let him carry guilt for helping me. Promise me that. I promise. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light change in the garden as morning turned to afternoon. Other residents came and went, some lucid and engaged, others lost in their own private worlds. This was Eleanor's future, a gradual retreat from reality until even the echo of who she'd been would finally fade. I should go, I said eventually, though every instinct screamed against leaving her. Yes, you should. But Thomas? She caught my hand as I stood to leave. Come back tomorrow? While I still know who you are? I'll come back every day. You don't have to, I want to. Let me have that, Eleanor. Let me spend whatever time we have left actually loving you instead of fighting ghosts. She nodded, tears streaming down her face again. I love you, Thomas Whitman. I have loved you every day for 25 years, and I will love you with whatever's left of my mind until there's nothing left at all. I love you too. More than you'll ever know. I kissed her forehead, tasting salt and sorrow, then walked away before my resolve could crumble. In the corridor, Dr. Kim was waiting with tissues and sympathetic eyes. How long does she have? I asked. Periods of clarity like today? Maybe a month, possibly 2. After that, she shrugged helplessly. The disease is aggressive. Each day, she'll remember a little less, recognize a little less, until eventually she won't remember how to swallow or breathe. And there's nothing curative, no. We can make her comfortable, manage her anxiety, ensure she's not in pain. But Mr. Whitman, the woman you just spoke with, this might be the last time you have a full conversation with her. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Eleanor was dying, had been dying for months while I'd been orchestrating our mutual destruction. The woman I'd spent the past year learning to hate had been sacrificing everything, her reputation, her marriage, her final months of clarity, to protect me from exactly the kind of devastating grief I was feeling now. At home, I found Sophia waiting in the kitchen, her eyes red from crying. How is she? Dying, I said simply. How are you? Relieved that you finally know. Terrified about what comes next. She looked up at me with Eleanor's eyes. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for lying to you, for letting you think we'd betrayed you. But she made me promise. Stop, I interrupted, pulling her into my arms for the first time in months. Stop apologizing. For loving your mother enough to keep her secrets. We held each other in the kitchen where I'd heard Sophia scream at me to pack my bags and leave, where I'd made the phone call that set this entire tragedy in motion. The marble countertops and designer appliances suddenly seemed irrelevant. Just expensive props in a drama that had always been about love and loss and the terrible choices we make when we're trying to protect the people we can't bear to lose. What do we do now? Sophia asked, her voice muffled against my shoulder. Now we spend whatever time she has left being her family instead of her adversaries. And after? I thought about Dr. Morrison's words from our therapy sessions, about how people sometimes make choices that seem rational in the moment but have consequences they never anticipated. Eleanor's choice to hide her illness had saved me from months of anticipatory grief, but it had also cost us months of honest time together. Now we had weeks, maybe days, to compress 25 years of love into whatever moments remained. After, we try to build something from the wreckage, I said. We honor her memory by being better to each other than we've been this past year. We make sure the foundation she cared about continues helping children. And we learn to live with the knowledge that sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who hurt us deepest, because they're trying to save us from something worse. That evening, I called Dr. Morrison to schedule one final therapy session, not as Thomas Jonathan, the fictional patient, but as Thomas Whitman, the husband of his dying patient. I owe you an apology, I told him when he answered. No, Mr. Whitman. I owe you one. I should have insisted that Eleanor tell you the truth from the beginning. She was protecting me the only way she knew how. You were helping her do that. I can't fault either of you for loving her enough to honor her wishes. The conversation that followed was painful but necessary. Dr. Morrison explained the medical reality of Eleanor's condition, the timeline we were facing, and the decisions that would need to be made in the coming weeks. He also shared stories about Eleanor's courage during her treatments, her determination to spare her family the burden of her care, and her unwavering love for Sophia and me even as her memory began to fail. She talks about you constantly, he said. Even on her worst days, when she doesn't remember her own name, she remembers that she loves someone named Thomas. That night, I sat in my study surrounded by divorce papers and legal documents that would never be filed, evidence of crimes that would never be prosecuted, and photographs of a marriage that would end not in bitter litigation but in hospital rooms and memory care facilities. On my desk sat Eleanor's wedding ring, which Dr. Kim had given me after Eleanor had removed it, confused about why she was wearing jewelry she didn't recognize. I slipped it onto my pinky finger, the only finger it would fit, and tried to imagine a future where my wife's voice was just a memory and her love was just a story I would tell myself on lonely nights. Tomorrow, I would return to the memory care facility. I would sit with Eleanor in the garden room and try to love her well in whatever time we had left. I would help Sophia navigate the grief of watching her mother disappear piece by piece. I would learn to forgive myself for the year we'd lost to Eleanor's well-meaning deception. But tonight, I grieved for the woman who had loved me enough to let me hate her, and for the terrible mathematics of a love so profound it could masquerade as betrayal to protect the people it cherished most. 3 weeks later, Eleanor no longer remembered my name. I sat beside her bed in the memory care facility, reading aloud from Pride and Prejudice, her favorite novel, though she no longer understood why the words sounded familiar. Her eyes would sometimes focus on my face with a flicker of recognition, as if she almost remembered loving someone who looked like me, but the connection never quite formed. She's comfortable, Dr. Kim assured me during our daily briefings. No pain, no distress. Just drifting. Sophia had moved back home, taking a leave of absence from her marketing job in Seattle to help coordinate Eleanor's care. We established a routine: mornings at the facility with Eleanor, afternoons handling the practical details of dismantling a life, evenings trying to rebuild our relationship one careful conversation at a time. The foundation board wants to rename it, Sophia told me over dinner on a Tuesday night. The Eleanor Whitman Foundation for Arts Education. They think it would honor her memory. I pushed food around my plate, appetite having become a stranger since Eleanor's diagnosis. What do you think? I think Mom would hate the attention but love that her name would help kids access music and art programs. Sophia smiled sadly. She always said the best monuments were the ones that kept giving. We'd been having conversations like this for weeks, small decisions that felt monumental, practical questions with emotional landmines. What to do with Eleanor's clothes? Donate them to the women's shelter she'd volunteered with. Her jewelry? Save it for Sophia and any future granddaughters. Her rose garden? Learn to tend it ourselves, badly, but with love. The doorbell interrupted our meal. Through the security camera, I saw Dr. Morrison standing on the front porch, looking uncomfortable, but determined. Should I get it? Sophia asked. I nodded, curious about what had brought him to our door. We'd spoken several times since my revelation about Eleanor's condition, but always at the facility or his office. This was the first time he'd come to the house where he'd never been welcome. Thomas, he said when I answered the door. I hope I'm not intruding. I have something I need to show you both. I led him to the living room where Sophia waited, her expression wary but not hostile. Dr. Morrison carried a laptop bag and wore the grave expression I'd learned to associate with bad news about Eleanor's condition. How is she today? He asked, settling into the chair across from us. The same. Maybe a little more confused than yesterday. I found myself cataloging Eleanor's decline in increments, marking time by what she'd forgotten rather than what she remembered. I need to show you something she recorded last month, during one of her clearer periods. She asked me to wait until she was no longer able to make decisions for herself. Dr. Morrison opened his laptop and turned the screen toward us. Eleanor's face appeared, filmed in what looked like his office. She looked tired but alert, her eyes holding the determined clarity that had characterized her best days. Hello, my darlings, Eleanor's recorded voice filled the room. If you're watching this, then I've reached the point where I can no longer speak for myself. James has been helping me prepare for this moment, and there are things I need you both to know. Sophia reached for my hand as we listened to my wife's final message. Thomas, by now you know the truth about my illness and why I chose to hide it from you. I hope you can forgive me for that deception, but I don't regret it. These past weeks, watching you visit me even though I barely recognize you, seeing you try to love someone who's already mostly gone, it breaks what's left of my heart. I was right to spare you from watching this happen slowly. Eleanor paused in the recording, gathering her thoughts. Even then, weeks ago, I could see the effort it took for her to maintain focus. But there's something else I need to tell you. Something I couldn't explain before because the timing wasn't right. Sophia, you've been carrying my secrets for too long, and I need to give your father the complete truth before it's too late. My daughter's grip on my hand tightened. Whatever was coming, she knew about it. Thomas, the day you found the safety deposit box key, that wasn't an accident. I left it where I knew you'd find it when you were ready to hear the truth. But I also left something else, something I hope you'll never need to use but that you should know about. Eleanor reached off camera and produced a thick legal document. I've prepared a detailed confession about my financial decisions regarding the foundation. Everything I took, everything I spent, every choice I made during my illness, it's all documented here, along with my mental state at the time of each decision. If anyone ever questions your handling of the foundation's assets, if anyone tries to suggest you were complicit in my actions, this document will protect you. I stared at the screen, watching my dying wife continue to try to shield me from consequences even from beyond her own awareness. I've also included letters for the major donors, explaining that my illness led to poor judgment but that the foundation's mission remains pure. And Thomas, there's a letter for you that I wrote on our 20th anniversary, before any of this started. I want you to read it after I'm gone, when you're trying to remember who we were before Alzheimer's stole our ending. The recording continued. For another 10 minutes, with Eleanor providing detailed instructions about her care, her wishes for her memorial service, and her hopes for how Thomas and Sophia would support each other after her death. She spoke with the pragmatic love of a woman who had accepted her fate and was determined to minimize the damage to those she'd leave behind. "There's one more thing," Eleanor said near the end of the recording. "James has been more than my doctor through this ordeal. He's been my friend, my confidant, and my co-conspirator in trying to protect you both. When I'm gone, don't let him disappear from your lives. He knows me in ways that you don't anymore, the version of me that fought this disease, that made impossible choices, that loved you both fiercely even while pushing you away. He can help you understand what these final months were really about." The recording ended with Eleanor looking directly into the camera. "I love you both more than language can express. Take care of each other. Remember me when I was whole. And don't let grief steal your futures the way illness stole mine." The laptop screen went dark, leaving us sitting in silence with the weight of Eleanor's final gift, one last attempt to protect us from pain she couldn't spare us. "There's more," Dr. Morrison said quietly, producing a manila envelope from his bag. "The confession she mentioned, the donor letters, and the personal letter. She wrote for you, Thomas." I took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside, I could feel the accumulated wisdom of a woman who had spent her final months of clarity trying to build bridges across the canyon of her own disappearance. "When do I read the personal letter?" I asked. She suggested waiting until after the funeral. She wanted your last memory of her voice to be from when she was still fully herself. Sophia spoke for the first time since the recording began. "She thought of everything, didn't she?" "Your mother was a remarkable woman," Dr. Morrison replied. "In my 30 years of practicing medicine, I've never met anyone who faced terminal illness with such grace and determination to protect others." That weekend, Eleanor slipped into the final stage of her decline. She stopped eating, stopped speaking, stopped responding to familiar voices. Dr. Kim moved her to the facility's hospice wing, where she lay surrounded by flowers and soft music, her breathing growing shallower each day. Sophia and I took turns sitting with her, reading aloud, playing her favorite songs, telling stories about happier times when she could still laugh at our jokes and correct our memories. Sometimes we thought we saw recognition flicker in her eyes, but Dr. Morrison gently explained that we were probably seeing what we needed to see rather than what was really there. On a Thursday morning in October, Eleanor Whitman died peacefully in her sleep. I was holding her hand when her breathing simply stopped, her face relaxing into an expression of profound peace. Sophia arrived 20 minutes later, and we sat with her body for an hour, saying goodbye to the woman who had loved us enough to let us hate her. The funeral was smaller than expected. Eleanor had specifically requested no media attention, no public mourning for a woman who had already been grieving herself for months. The foundation board members attended, along with Dr. Morrison, Dr. Kim, and several staff members from the memory care facility who had cared for Eleanor during her final weeks. I spoke briefly about Eleanor's courage, her generosity, and her unwavering commitment to protecting the people she loved, even when that protection looked like betrayal. Sophia read a poem Eleanor had written years ago about the temporary nature of all beautiful things. Dr. Morrison shared memories of Eleanor's determination to fight her illness on her own terms, her refusal to surrender to despair even when surrender would have been easier. After the service, as the last mourners departed, Sophia and I stood alone beside Eleanor's grave. The headstone was simple: Eleanor Whitman, beloved wife and mother, who loved more deeply than we knew. "Are you going to read it?" Sophia asked, noticing the envelope I'd been carrying in my jacket pocket. "Tonight," I said. "When I'm ready to hear her voice one last time." That evening, I sat in my study surrounded by 25 years of shared memories, photographs, love letters, anniversary cards, ticket stubs from movies and concerts and vacations. When we were young and thought we had forever. I opened Eleanor's final letter with the reverence reserved for sacred texts. My dearest Thomas, I'm writing this on our 20th anniversary, watching you sleep beside me and trying to imagine a future where I might not be here to celebrate our 25th. It seems impossible now, but I've learned that life has a way of making the impossible inevitable. If you're reading this, then the impossible has happened, and I want you to know something: our story was not a tragedy. It was a love story that happened to end sadly, which is different. Tragedies are about waste and meaningless loss. Our story is about building something beautiful together and then fighting to preserve its meaning even when the ending couldn't be changed. 20 years ago, when you put this ring on my finger, we promised to love each other in sickness and in health. I know you think I broke that promise by hiding my illness from you, but I disagree. I loved you in sickness by protecting you from having to watch me disappear. I loved you in health by giving you memories that weren't contaminated by the knowledge of what was coming. You were the love of my life, Thomas Whitman. Every day for 25 years was a gift I never deserved but treasured beyond measure. If I had to do it all again, knowing how it would end, I would choose you every single time. Take care of Sophia. Help her understand that love sometimes requires impossible choices, and that the people who love us most are often the ones who have to hurt us to save us from something worse. Take care of yourself. Find someone to love again when you're ready. Don't let grief become a monument to me, let joy become one instead, and take care of our story. Remember that we were happy. Remember that we were lucky. Remember that we had 25 years of loving each other in a world where most people never find that kind of connection at all. I will love you forever, even from wherever I've gone, all my heart, Eleanor P.S. The roses need to be pruned in November. The red ones by the back gate are temperamental but worth the effort. Like love itself. I read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in the desk drawer next to our wedding photo. Outside my study window, Eleanor's rose garden waited for November, when I would learn to tend it with the same patient devotion she had shown our marriage, imperfectly, but with love. The next morning, I called Marcus to discuss the foundation's future. The Eleanor Whitman Foundation for Arts Education would ensure that her name lived on in the lives of children who would learn to paint and sing and dance because of her vision. The confession she'd prepared would protect the foundation's reputation and my own, transforming her final act of theft into a final act of love. Sophia decided to move back to Portland permanently, taking a position as the foundation's program coordinator. I want to be part of what Mom built, she explained. I want to help tell her story the right way. Dr. Morrison became an unexpected friend, helping us both process the complex grief of losing someone who had already been lost for months. He shared stories about Eleanor's final year, her humor in the face of devastating diagnosis, her creativity in planning our protection, her determination to love well even while dying badly. 6 months after Eleanor's death, I ran into David Rosenberg at a charity auction. Eleanor's former divorce attorney approached me hesitantly, clearly unsure how I would receive him. "Thomas," he said carefully, "I owe you an explanation about your wife's case." "No explanation necessary," I replied. "You were representing your client's interests as she presented them to you." "Actually, that's what I need to explain. Eleanor never intended to go through with the divorce. She hired me to create the appearance of legal proceedings while she figured out how to tell you about her illness. When she realized the Alzheimer's was progressing faster than expected, she asked me to escalate things to force a resolution." I stared at him, understanding dawning. "She orchestrated her own arrest. She knew that if you discovered evidence of the foundation transfers, you'd have her investigated. She counted on your thoroughness, your unwillingness to let crimes go unpunished. She used your own integrity against you to trigger the revelation. She couldn't bring herself to make directly." Even in death, Eleanor continued to surprise me with the depth of her planning and the complexity of her love. A year after Eleanor's funeral, Sophia married her college boyfriend in a small ceremony. In our backyard, surrounded by her mother's roses. As I walked my daughter down the aisle, I could almost hear Eleanor's voice whispering approval and offering advice about the care and feeding of marriages. 2 years later, the Eleanor Whitman Foundation opened its first dedicated facility, a beautiful building where underprivileged children could take music lessons, art classes, and drama workshops. At the dedication ceremony, I spoke about love that survives death by transforming into service, about marriages that end not in bitterness but in legacy. 5 years after Eleanor's death, I remarried a kind, patient woman named Margaret who understood that I came with a ghost who would always be part of our household. On our wedding day, I wore Eleanor's wedding ring on a chain around my neck, close to my heart where her memory lived alongside my capacity for new love. 10 years later, I sat in the same study where I'd first learned about Eleanor's betrayal, reading a letter from a young girl whose violin lessons were sponsored by the foundation. She was 10 years old, the same age Sophia had been when Eleanor first dreamed of starting a charity. The girl wrote about discovering that music could help her express feelings she didn't have words for, about finding beauty in a world that often felt harsh and unfair. Eleanor had been right about one thing: the best monuments were the ones that kept giving. As I finished reading the letter, I looked out the window at the rose garden where Margaret was teaching our young neighbor how to prune the temperamental red roses by the back gate. The garden was thriving under her care, different than it had been under Eleanor's but no less beautiful. Love, I had learned, was like those roses, it required pruning sometimes, cutting away dead growth to make room for new blooms. Eleanor's love had pruned away my illusions about permanence and taught me to treasure what I had while I had it. Her death had pruned away my bitterness and taught me that forgiveness was just another word for understanding. The last laugh, I realized, belonged to Eleanor after all. She had bet everything on the possibility that love could survive deception, that understanding could triumph over anger, that the people we leave behind could find ways to honor our memory by loving well in our absence. She had been right about all of it. In the end, we had not been destroyed by her secrets, we had been transformed by her love. And in a world where most stories end in either tragedy or triumph, perhaps transformation was the most beautiful ending of all. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.